How to get your kids to listen without yelling? Today is day 4 of our 5-day challenge. Vicki, I'm going to geek out on you today. As a psychologist, I've been waiting for this one. Today, our objective is to get into your thinking a little bit. We're going to pry into your psyche and take a look at the expectations. So our objective today is to increase self-awareness through metacognition and examining our expectations.
The mantra today is, things are just as they should be. I am right on schedule. This one can be tricky at first to say.
It can be tricky because we don't always feel that that's true. Right? You think about it. Are things exactly as they should be? Are you right on schedule? And notice that you've already got an answer to that. We're suggesting here this mantra because you don't know. You don't know. Think about it. Do you know? Like you've got some cosmic connection to the grand calendar of all things. Do you know if you're on schedule or not?
Well, and I think one of the things about this that's great to remember is that things are, I'm on schedule. If we have to remember our expectations, and that's what we're really diving into today, is our expectations. If we look at where we are expecting to be, we're probably just right, we're on schedule. It's just like a little child who's falling down a lot. We do not say, oh my goodness, you fell down. We praise the fact that they took the step.
Right. And like the child, you're right on schedule too.
We're taking the steps.
Whether you are or not, you don't know for sure. But notice that you have a position about that. With today's mantra, which I hope you wrote down in your journal and you will repeat several times today, things are just as they should be. I'm right on schedule. You're introducing a whole new way of thinking into your own mind. And how would it feel if that were true? This is why you get to practice that mantra. Now let's get to the challenge. To introduce the challenge, let's acknowledge something about anger and frustration and the source thereof.
Right, they're always secondary emotions.
Yes.
They're usually, they come because your expectations are unmet.
They've been violated. Somehow things didn't go as you expected them to. Well, really, you're not very good at predicting things anyway. But notice that your expectations will lead to frustration and anger if they're not met or if they're violated in some way. With that acknowledgement, let's also do some cognitive work today. Let's work on the brain and on the thinking so that you can understand a little bit better where those expectations are being violated. And you may not have even thought about it this way. But every time you yell at your kids, why? Why did you yell at your kids? Can you see that it's because something didn't go the way you expected it to go or wanted it to go? Do we need to make a distinction, Vicki, about what you expect versus what you want?
No, they're kind of the same in many ways.
They get mixed together in our own mind. So just acknowledge that. Now here's how you can implement this challenge.
I was just thinking that let's just take today and think of 3 examples when you kind of lost it. Because usually we've lost it at least 3 times by this point in the day, right?
And if not today, you can look at the last 24, 48 hours.
Right.
But think of 3 examples. So come up with 3 ideas in your mind of when you lost it. Now you're going to do a little bit of journaling work on this. And we're going to use the acronym P.E.A.C.E. So in your journal, write out those letters down the page. P-E-A-C-E. Just write them down the left-hand column on a journal page because you're going to fill in some information about these 3 examples on each of these. Let's start with P. P stands for problem. What was the problem? So for each of these 3 examples that you just thought of, jot down next to the P on your journal, what was the problem?
And I would interject, let's make it fairly short and succinct. A lot of times with the problem, I have found that people want to just give all of the backstory and all of the reasons. Just say one thing, like for instance, I yelled at Sophie because she made a mess while eating.
Yes. Or James didn't come home on time, or whatever it is. Okay, brief, succinct. What was the problem? That's P.
That moves us into E, and the word for that is expectations.
This is where it gets a little more challenging, and we need to look into our own thinking. What was I expecting? What was my expectation?
There is so much value in this. I think most of the time we're not even aware of our expectation. We go straight from situation to frustration and anger, and we bypass the fact that there was even an expectation that was violated. So before we can do anything different with it, we need to identify that expectation.
You just identified one of the most common cognitive errors that we make, and it has to do with what we call the fundamental attributional error.
Woo.
And we make up words for stuff in psychology. It makes us feel smart.
Yeah.
But this error that we all make is that we feel something. So when you feel that anger that has you yelling, your mind is asking, why am I upset? And it's drawing you back to P, the problem.
Right.
When really it should be drawing you back to E, the expectation or the belief set that's causing that frustration. So in the example, I yelled at Sophie because she made a mess at lunch. I think you shared that example.
Right.
What was your expectation?
That she would eat neatly. And maybe even that problem, maybe the problem was Sophie made a mess at lunch. I shouldn't have even said I yelled because, but the problem was Sophie made a mess.
Yes.
The expectation she wouldn't, that she would eat neatly, and that's kind of where we go from there.
Or James didn't come home on time. What was my expectation?
That he'd be home at 10:30, right?
5 minutes early or whatever, right? And when I say it that way, you can see, well, maybe that's not a realistic expectation. We're coming to that. But at this point, under the E part on your journal, simply identify as accurately as you can what was my expectation that was violated that had me feeling so upset.
Right.
Now that leads us to the next step in this P.E.A.C.E formula, P-E-A. A is an alternative expectation. In other words, what else could I reasonably expect here that might be more true or more accurate? Let's go back to Sophie for the first example. What's a more reasonable expectation? Well, Sophie is 4 years old, and this is what 4-year-olds do. As she continues to learn and develop, she'll gain more maturity and more skills where she can eat lunch more neatly. Now, that was a mouthful. But do you see where I'm going with this? As a 4-year-old, what's a reasonable alternative expectation?
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate for a minute. What about, let's go back to the son that didn't come home. Are we letting him off the hook if we say, oh, you know, it's normal for 16-year-olds to break curfew?
This is a great question, Vicki. Because it depends on their stage of maturity, how you're going to respond. What we're trying to get to is what was your expectation that had you all tipped over?
Okay.
You may still have an appropriate consequence for James coming home late. What's an alternative expectation? James is a 16-year-old boy. How many of them come home late? I don't know all the statistics, Vicki, do you?
No.
Is it reasonable to expect that maybe James, as a 16-year-old boy, is going to come home late occasionally?
Right. You know, and that just brings me back to another comment too. If you haven't listened to a lot of our YouTube, go back and look about the stages, because I think that's something that's really important. Maybe it's important to realize, you know, my kid is 8 and I was expecting him to cooperate with me. So I was expecting him to be on stage 1 or stage 2, but he is responding in a stage 1 way. And so you're not really letting him off the hook. You're just looking at your expectations. I was expecting stage 3. I got stage 2, so I'm frustrated. I was expecting stage 2. I got stage 1, and that's left me feeling frustration.
The frustration, remember, is because of unmet or violated expectations. So in the A stage of this P.E.A.C.E acronym, we're simply coming up with an alternative expectation which changes how we feel and therefore how we can show up. It has nothing to do with what consequences our child might
We're not
get.
letting them off the hook necessarily.
Right.
We're just reframing it and getting clear about our expectations and offering our brain and our emotions another way to look at it.
Look at how the dynamic changes with James, for example, our 16-year-old son who came home late. And if my expectation is, yeah, sometimes 16-year-olds come home late, he comes through the door and I'm like, well, let's get to the consequences. And I'm not tipped over because I fully expected that this could happen from time to time. That's why that's a powerful step. Take some time to work this through. For all three of your examples, make sure you've got a good alternative expectation that is consistent with truth and their stage of moral development. If you need some help with that, ask for some help on that Instagram post where we have a similar post where we get to interact about the day 3 challenge.
In our acronym, C stands for change in feeling. As you are identifying your expectation and an alternative expectation, just become aware. Where on a scale of 0 to 10 was your frustration or anger? It might have been at a 7 or an 8, and now it's at a 4. Notice I didn't say it's completely gone.
Probably
right?
it's not.
Probably it's not gone because the problem hasn't been resolved at all. But just realize that as you are thinking things through, getting aware the expectations of yourself, of your thought process. Remember, your feelings are driven by your thoughts. And so as we kind of start to take control of looking at how did I get to this feeling, here are the thoughts. I thought he should have been on stage. He should have just come home. She should have cleaned up after herself, whatever it is. Just become aware of the thoughts and then take an assessment of how your feelings are. So change of your feeling, just realize that it has changed as you have evaluated the situation.
So you'll have 2 numbers for each of your 3 examples. I was feeling, and then put a number, like Vicki was saying. And 10 means I'm busting out of my skin. And 0 means, don't even notice.
I'm asleep.
Yeah, so pick a number that reflects where you were at the time of the incident. And then as you've done this exercise and thought about an alternative expectation, and as you imagine yourself applying that new expectation, how does the feeling change? Put a second number for how it feels as you consider the new alternative expectation. Now you've gotten up to the last letter of the acronym, and on that last E, we're going to make an experience promise. That's what the E stands for, experience promise. In other words, what am I committed to do now based on my experience and what I just learned? This is an important exercise to help you tune in to your own mind, your own expectations. And let's learn from those 3 examples that you came up with at the beginning of the video. Those 3 times when you lost it, those 3 times when you blew it, or when you yelled or lost your cool. Those are valuable learning experiences. So on this last E, just jot down your commitment to yourself and others moving forward, your experience promise.
I'm not sure I really understand the experience promise. So give us an example with Sophie. So I realized that 4-year-olds, they spill their milk, or they sometimes touch their food because they're still very sensory at times. And so I've changed my expectation. Okay, 4-year-olds often are sensory. How do I go into experiencing a promise?
So the experience promise with Sophie might be, okay, based on what I've just learned from thinking through that incident where I yelled at Sophie because she made a mess at lunch, and all of the expectations that we talked about, my experience promise is I will look for, in the next week, 3 opportunities to respond to Sophie differently when she makes a mess.
Okay.
Do you see how that's taking what I've learned from this and I get to apply it to the next time? Because guess what? Sophie at 4
is going to make another mess.
What about James? Okay, we can apply another experience promise there. And the experience promise might be, I will look for times to express appreciation to James for all of the things he's doing well. And I'll do that 3 times in the next week.
And I think the experience promise can also be that, because remember, our ultimate goal is to stop yelling at our children, get them to listen. It might be that I'm going to make sure that the consequence I deliver is going to be in direct relationship, correct correlation with their stage. So maybe with James, instead of giving him like just a conversation, maybe he needs a consequence because he's responding in a way that would imply consequences instead of just this conversation and expecting that to take care of everything.
And I will deliver that consequence with a calm voice and face, and with that pleasant smile that I always have as a positive parent. Awesome! You've completed at least the video portion of day 4 of our 5-day challenge. Make sure that you come back tomorrow for day 5, where we'll wrap this whole thing up. And we invite you to also interact with us on Instagram, where you can share your experience on the corresponding post.
Her head was down, face locked onto the phone.